The Dragonback Series by Timothy Zahn. Book 6. Dragon and Liberator. Chapter 25. Tanim knew something important was happening the minute she eased her head around the edge of the grill and peered down into the Advocatus Diabolis bridge. Not only were Neverland and Frost present, but so were Allison and the Chief Valaga, the one they called Lord Highest. And all of them had the same sense of tension and alertness about them. Had the refugee fleet arrived? Tanim listened closely, trying hard to sort through all the strange terms and phrases. Harper had taught her some of them, so it was a little less confusing than it had been in the beginning. But there were so many of them, and all this was still so very new to her. Once she saw Allison glance directly up at the grill she was hiding behind. Tanim tensed, but the girl looked away again without any reaction or comment. And then Tanim heard the word Harper had told her specifically to listen for. "Hammerfall 1! Deploy!" Frost ordered toward the radio microphone. "Hammerfall 2! Prepare to deploy on my command! Hammerfall 3! Continue to hold position!"
"Deploy!"
Tanim flicked her tail. Harper had made it clear that what she was to do when she heard that word. Letting her eyes linger for a moment on Allison, Tanim backed away from the grill and headed back for Harper's stateroom prison. He was lying face down on the floor in his underwear when she arrived, doing an exercise he had told her was called push-ups.
"Harper!"
she called softly from the grill.
"Yeah,"
he grunted, hopping back to his feet and stepping to the grill. Lately, they'd been leaving the grill in place, lest one of the Malison Ring mercenaries catch it open. But only the top 2 screws were fastened, and those only loosely. Harper pulled up the bottom of the grill, angling it up far enough to get a hand in. Tanim touched the hand and slid onto his skin, and then right back off onto the deck.
"They said the word," she reported. "Frost said Hammerfall 1 deploy. Then he said for Hammerfall 2 to get ready to deploy when he told them to, and that Hammerfall 3 was to hold position."
"I see," Harper said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. His manner had gone suddenly quiet and dark. "Did you take the long way around and go by Neverland's office like I asked you to?"
"Yes,"
Tanim confirmed.
"There were 3 men standing guard outside the door."
"Were they bunched up?" he asked. "Standing in a close group, I mean."
"Not really,"
Tanim said.
"There were 2 right by the door and 1 a few steps away from them."
Harper hissed between his teeth. "Frost shows his ability to learn," he murmured.
"I don't understand,"
Tanim said, swishing her tail back and forth as she gazed into his face. There was something about this new Harper that frightened her. "Either he doesn't completely trust Allison, or he isn't convinced that I'm as far out of circulation as he'd like," Harper explained. "Either way, he doesn't want anyone skulking around and using his interworld transmitter without permission. The 2 access points are the bridge, where he's got lots of people to watch for trouble, and his office, where he doesn't. Only now he does."
"You want to call someone?"
Tanim asked, grabbing onto the part that she understood. "I need to call someone, yes," Harper said grimly. "Unfortunately. Well, there's always another way, isn't there?"
"Do you want me to help you?"
Tanim asked hesitantly.
"I can fight a little."
He smiled. "I have no doubt you can," he said. "But even with your help, there are too many of them."
"I also have the special needles you put into the duct when you first came aboard,"
Tanim reminded him.
"Allison gave them to me to hide."
That would work if I didn't have to cross half the ship to get there, Harper said. From here, though, I'd never make it that far without someone spotting me.
Then maybe I could do it for you,
Tanim offered.
I could get to the office through the ducts. If you could teach me how to work the controls, maybe I could make the call for you.
For a moment, Harper gazed into space, his expression tight and thoughtful. And then he shook his head. No good, he said. It's too complicated for me to explain, and any fumbling would tip off the people on the bridge that someone was in there. Then they'd shut down the system, maybe even dismantle it. He forced another smile. Besides, you could hardly get in and out alone without leaving a trail. A lot of sliced ductwork, if nothing else. And once Neverland knew about her, Tanim knew, he and Frost would hunt her down and kill her.
I don't care, she said,
trying hard to be brave.
If it's that important, I'm willing to risk my life.
I know you are, Harper said gently. Reaching over, he stroked the top of her head, scratching his fingertips briefly against the scales behind her ears. But I do care, and I'm not willing to risk you. Not just yet.
Then when?
I don't know, he said. But the longer you stay hidden, the longer they don't know about you, the better the chance that you can help Allison later on. Perhaps for something even more important than this. Standing up, he held out his hand to her. You'd better get back to the bridge and see what they're up to, he said, his tone suddenly brisk and businesslike.
What about you?
Tanim asked, ignoring the hand. I'm going to do what has to be done, he said. I've enjoyed our time together, Tanim. I wish it could have been longer, but in life you take what you can get.
Are you going to attack those men by yourself?
Tanim persisted. And thank you especially for trusting me, he added. Come on now, up and at 'em. We've got work to do. Reluctantly, Tanim touched his hand and slid up onto his skin. He stepped back to the grill and slipped his hand into the duct, and Tanim slid off again into the narrow space.
Thank you for protecting me,
Tanim said. My pleasure, Harper said quietly, and my honor. He wiggled his fingertips at her. Now scoot. Pulling his hand out, he closed the grill. For another minute, Tanim stayed where she was, watching as he sat back down on the bed and began scratching at the inside of his upper right thigh. Exactly the same way, she remembered, that he'd scratched at his forearms just before he pulled away those pieces of pretend skin. And sure enough, as she watched, he pulled away an identical flap from his leg. She waited until he'd pulled a similar flap from his other leg. Then, as he gathered his clothing and began to get dressed, she finally moved away down the duct, her heart heavy. Something bad was about to happen. Something very bad. And somewhere deep inside her, Tanim knew she'd never see him again. Jack! Jack jerked awake, blinking his eyes violently. In that first confusing moment, he tried to bring his hands up to rub his eyes and wondered why he couldn't. Then his brain cleared a bit and he remembered. He was in a vac suit, hung up on a bulkhead like a slab of fresh meat, locked inside a half-wrecked troop carrier with a bunch of Brumgas. Had been all that, in fact, for the past 3 days. Jack, can you hear me? He tensed, this time coming fully awake. It wasn't Dracos's voice speaking directly to his mind, as he'd first thought. It was Langston's voice coming from the comm clip on his collar. With a little burst of static, the call was repeated, this time clearer. Langston? He croaked back, his mouth dry from his sleep. For a second, he had a flash of fear, wondering if Langston's voice had even now was being transmitted straight to Neverland via the radio in Jack's suit. Oh, but no. Neverland had shut off his radio, and none of the Brumgas who'd been changing his oxygen tanks over the past 3 days had bothered to turn it back on.
Yes, Langston confirmed. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you and Dracos for everything you did for me on Similine.
No big deal, Jack said, frowning. Why was Langston doing this? More important, why was he doing it now?
It most certainly was, Langston said. Dracos nearly got himself killed in the process. So did you, for that matter. Anyway, I wasn't sure I'd ever thanked you properly. So this is it.
You're welcome, Jack said. At the edges of his mind, he could feel Dracos listening silently but alertly. What's going on out there?
Our group's about to be deployed, Langston said. That means that Neverland's false starts are over, which means we're finally at the real rendezvous point.
Something cold closed around Jack's heart. And? He asked carefully.
Someone has to stop these people, Langston said, his voice hard and determined. But we're going to need help. I'm going to try to call that help.
What are you talking about? Jack asked. Langston?
He's talking about sending a message,
a new voice put in quietly.
It's the only way any of us can.
Jack blinked. What was that? Harper? He demanded.
But you're too late, Langston,
Harper went on, a touch of grim humor coloring his voice.
You hear me? You be a good boy and play it cool and stay in formation. I've got this one.
Now what are the two of you talking about? Jack demanded. Come on, someone talk to me.
I appreciate the offer, Harper, Langston said, but this isn't your fight.
It's very much my fight,
Harper said softly.
Besides, I've already burned all my bridges behind me. I can't be of any more use in this war, but there's a chance you can be.
But
no buts, soldier,
Harper said firmly.
You're still a Star Force officer. Consider this an order.
There was a faint hissing sound as one of the two men exhaled on the comm clip.
Understood, sir,
Langston said, his voice stiff and formal and unhappy.
Good luck, sir.
There was a double click as both comm clips shut off. What in the world was that all about? Jack snarled, fear and uncertainty and helplessness rising in his throat and threatening to choke him. Dracos, what was that all about?
I don't know!
The Kadah's voice came grimly into his mind.
But nothing good! I'm afraid, Jack, that the battle has begun! Hammerfall groups have reached their positions,
Frost reported, half turning to face Neverland and Allison.
Backstop, ready to deploy! I trust you approve of our tactical landscape?
Neverland asked Allison. He was half joking, Allison knew, but only half. He and Frost and the Valaga had clearly worked out all this in advance, probably months ago. But the opinion of General Davi's daughter was apparently still worth something, even if only for amusement value. Looks reasonable enough, she said. Your three main forces, the Hammerfalls, are set in a wide triangle formation behind you, perfect for herding you toward the refugee fleet. They're also positioned far enough back that they won't overtake you before you get there. That's the tricky part, really, making it look like they're trying to get you when they really aren't.
True,
Neverland said.
On the other hand, the Kadah and Shantine aren't going to know how fast Jin 90s, K-29s, and Rhino 10s can fly.
Point, Allison conceded. At the same time, you don't want them so far back that they'll overtake you too slowly. That might give the Kadah and Shantine too much time to stop and think while you're barreling toward them.
Which is the reason for the 5 Jin 90s of the backstop group,
Neverland said, clearly pleased that he and Frost had anticipated that question and had an answer ready for it.
As our supposed rearguard, they can move up toward us if we need the Hammerfall groups to speed up, or else fall back if we need them to slow down.
Clever, Allison said. She'd already figured that out, actually, but it wouldn't hurt to stroke Neverland's ego a little. You can't risk any direct radio communication with the Hammerfall ships. The Kadar would definitely find that suspicious if they spotted it. This way, all the Hammerfall leaders have to do is monitor the backstop group's position relative to the Advocatus Diabli, and they'll know what you want them to do.
Exactly,
Neverland said.
The Lord Highest doesn't think the fleet would pick up a tight beam pointed at such angles, but it's better to be safe than...
Sir! The Advocatus Diabli's captain spoke up sharply. We've got life pod separation. Number 2, portside bow.
What?
Neverland demanded, crossing over to stand behind him.
Who in?
Never mind who!
Frost cut him off.
Where's he going?
He's curving around, the captain reported, peering at his displays. Looks like he's trying to... Correction, he's curving around again, picking up speed.
Evasive!
Frost barked.
Backstop group, emergency close and engage!
What's going on?
Neverland demanded.
Frost! He's gonna ram!
Frost snarled.
I said evasive, dang you!
Trying, sir, the helmsman shot back. We're not as maneuverable as he is.
Backstop!
Frost snapped.
Backstop leader,
a tight voice came back.
We're out of position, Colonel. No way to get him in time without hitting you.
Frost glared at the displays, muttering under his breath. Then abruptly, he turned to the Lord Highest.
The death!
He ordered.
Get him with the death! Now!
You do not order us in that tone.
The blazes with my tone!
Frost snapped.
Just kill him!
For a moment, the Valaga gazed at him. Then he muttered a pair of guttural-sounding words toward his shoulder. There was a slight flicker of the bridge lights.
Got him,
the captain announced. Helm, hard about.
Too late,
Neverland said, pointing at the display.
He's going to hit.
The captain must have seen that too. Collision! He shouted. All hands! Lunging at the nearest console, Allison grabbed the hand grip and braced herself. A fraction of a second later, the life pod hit. It wasn't a big impact, not nearly as big or violent as Allison had expected. The Advocatus Diabli shuddered like a dog giving a final shake as it shed the last bit of water after a dip in a cold lake. But the bridge didn't fill with the screaming of the hull breach alarm or even the slightly less strident hooting of the decompression warning. She took a careful breath, feeling slightly ridiculous. Given the urgency of Frost's warning, she'd expecting something a lot more dramatic. Neverland apparently had too.
Is that it?
He asked, sounding flustered and more than a little annoyed.
No, that is not it,
Frost bit out.
Captain, get someone to the inner world transmitter and shut it down.
Shut it down,
Neverland put in.
But it's not on.
You worthless fool,
Frost snarled at him.
What do you think an emergency beacon is?
Neverland stiffened.
Oh, no.
Exactly!
Snarling a curse, Frost left the bridge at a dead run.
What is happening?
The Valaga demanded.
Neverland, explain. Later,
Neverland said, starting to follow Frost.
Not later,
the Valaga insisted.
Now.
With a visible effort, Neverland slowed to a stop.
This ship is equipped with an emergency distress beacon,
he ground out.
That beacon is connected to our interworld transmitter. In an emergency, such as a life pod ramming our hull, it sends out a signal that anyone within range can pick up.
He glared at Allison.
And can trace.
Don't look at me, Allison warned. Whatever happened, it wasn't my... She broke off as a brief staccato of shots sounded in the distance. What in the world? Whatever happened, it wasn't my doing, she went on, fighting to keep her voice calm and even. The daughter of Aram Davies shouldn't be startled by a little random gunfire after all. I suggest you or Colonel Frost start by taking a head count and finding out who's missing.
No need,
Neverland said bitterly.
It was Harper. It had to be him.
Allison felt her stomach tighten. Harper. Of course. All by himself? She asked pointedly. An interesting trick.
Braxton's full of interesting tricks,
Neverland said, but there was a glint in his eye as his gaze drifted around the bridge. Across the bridge, the door opened and Frost reappeared.
The transmitter's been shut off,
he said.
If we're lucky, we got it fast enough that no one was able to get a solid fix on it.
That was my transmitter you were shooting at? Neverland demanded.
Blast it all, Colonel! Would you rather have Harper's friends drop in on us while we're in the middle of looting the refugee ships?
Frost asked.
If someone followed Harper to Point 2, they're only 4 days away.
Neverland's lips pressed together into a thin line.
Captain, get your men busy making repairs to the interworld transmitter,
he growled.
Yes, sir,
the captain said. Neverland looked at Allison.
And once it's back together, have them disconnect the emergency beacon system, he added. Do not fear the friends of our enemies, the Valaga said. If any come, they will die as surely as will the Kadar and Shanteen.
Let us just hope your Kadar and Shanteen are on time,
Frost put in darkly.
If they're late, we could have been caught between 2 different groups of enemies. That's generally considered a bad idea.
Do not lecture me on military truth, the Valaga said stiffly. And do not concern yourself with such matters. If our enemies arrive together, they will die together. I'm sure they will, Neverland said before Frost could answer. Meanwhile, we have our final few ships to deploy. Not yet, the Valaga said. You have tracked the life pod that carried the traitor. I don't know, Neverland said. Captain?
Yes, sir, we have its trajectory,
the captain said, peering at its displays.
You will retrieve it, the Valaga said. Send your ships now.
Lord Highest, all we have available right now are the 5 Gen 90s of the backstop group,
Frost reminded him.
Everyone else is over 1,000 miles behind us at the 3 Hammerfall start points.
If you're worried, don't be. Just retrieve the pod, the Lord Highest said again. If you're worried about the refugee fleet spotting it, we can simply destroy it, Neverland offered. You will retrieve it intact, the Valaga said. We have never before used the death on a human. I wish to study exactly how its effects and have, shall we say, done their job.
Neverland looked at Frost, and Allison could sense a sudden uneasiness in both men.
There's no need to make a full investigation,
Neverland said, his voice studiously casual.
You told me you and your colleagues would be leaving as soon as the Kadar and Shanteen were destroyed. There is science to be done, Neverland, the Valaga said. The science will be done. Retrieve the life pod and the body.
Neverland's lip twitched, but he nodded to Frost.
Go ahead, Colonel, he said, again working at sounding casual. I'm sure your pilots can figure out some way to grab the life pod.
For a half-dozen heartbeats, Frost continued to glower at the Valaga. Then, with clear reluctance, he gestured to the captain.
Feedback stop leader the life pod's trajectory. And order him to retrieve it,
he said shortly. He looked back at Neverland.
Anything else?
No, that will be all.
Neverland turned to Allison.
Would you care to sit in on the autopsy?
No, thank you, Allison said. If you don't mind, I'd like to go back to my stateroom for a while and get some rest.
Good idea,
Neverland said, his eyes suddenly thoughtful as he gazed at her.
Yes, a very good idea.
As always, Allison gave her stateroom a quick sweep from her sensor as soon as she was inside. As usual, she found they'd planted another bug while she'd been out. Dealing with it, she lay down on the bed and let her heartache wash over her. It was all going wrong. All of it. Spectacularly and devastatingly wrong. Tanim was probably dead, drifting off into that strange fourth-dimensional world, all because Allison hadn't been able to break free from Neverland and Frost in time. Jack and Dracos didn't seem to have made any move to take over the troop carrier like she'd expected them to. Maybe Neverland had changed his mind and they were dead too. And Harper was dead, killed quickly, quietly, and efficiently by the Valaga and their monstrous death weapon. It was all coming apart, and it was all her fault. What in space had ever made her think she could pull off something like this anyway? She didn't know how long she lay there, staring at the ceiling and condemning herself and her failures. All she knew was that she was suddenly startled out of a light doze by a soft scratching at the ventilation grill. She bounded off the bed onto her feet, staggering a little as the blood level in her brain dropped briefly before her heart got up to speed again. "Tanim?" she called softly, afraid to hope. But for once, hope hadn't abandoned her.
Yes!
The Kadaz's familiar voice came back.
May I come in?
Of course, Allison said, grabbing the desk chair and pulling it over to the grill. I don't suppose you still have the screwdrivers we borrowed from Harper.
Yes, I have everything waiting right here,
Tanim said. A thin piece of plastic slid into view through one of the openings in the duct.
Here!
Allison took it and set feverishly to work. It was the flat-headed screwdriver, not exactly suited to the crosshead bolts the grill was fastened with. But it was good enough, and Allison was inspired, and within 2 minutes she had the grill open far enough for her to wedge her hand up and into the duct. 2 seconds after that, Tanim was once again nestled against her skin. Oh, thank goodness, Allison murmured as she fastened the grill. Thank goodness, I was hoping you'd found a safe haven.
I couldn't get to you,
Tanim murmured back.
You were with Neverland and Frost the whole time.
I know, Allison said, climbing off the chair and putting it back in its place by the desk. Going back to the bed, she lay down again. But this time it was relief that washed through her instead of heartache. I tried every trick I could think of to get away, but they weren't buying any of them, she went on. I couldn't even go to the bathroom alone for those first few hours. I don't think they completely trusted me back then. Probably still don't, she added, remembering the look on Neverland's face as she'd left the bridge just now. All I could do was hope you could find a sleeping crewman or someone else you could borrow long enough to get by. She was babbling like an idiot, she knew, but strangely enough, she didn't care. I tried to point you forward toward the crew section a couple of times. Did you notice?
I did better than that,
Tanim interrupted her gently.
Harper let me stay with him.
She paused, and Allison winced with the sudden sadness she could sense in her friend. He's dead, isn't he?
Yes,
said Tanim. I thought so, Allison said. So he was in the life pod. Fresh tears misting across her eyes. He died trying to save Dracos' people.
Did he succeed?
Allison swallowed hard. Not by himself, she said. Maybe not even with all the rest of us to help. She wiped at her eyes with her sleeve. But it's not over yet, she added firmly. An hour ago, all her hope had been gone, but now some of it was back. Maybe enough of it. Not by a long shot. There was a soft knock on the door. Hide, she whispered urgently to Tanim as she stood up. She waited until the Khaddah had settled herself out of sight beneath her clothing, then keyed the door open. It was Neverland. To Allison's mild surprise, he was alone.
Miss Davy,
He said. He greeted her courteously.
May I come in?
As you wish, Allison said, stepping back out of the doorway, her heart thudding suddenly in her chest. Could he have recognized her, as Frost had back on Brummagem? Please, sit down.
Thank you.
Stepping to the desk, he swiveled the chair around and lowered himself into it.
I trust you had a good rest,
he continued as Allison perched herself on the corner of the bed facing him. I'm feeling much better, thank you, Allison said, telling the complete truth for once.
Good.
Neverland paused.
Tell me, how soon do you think your father could get a full military force out here?
Not nearly soon enough, Allison said. The refugee fleet could be here, as early as tomorrow?
Theoretically, yes,
Neverland said.
Though personally, I'm not expecting them for another 4 to 6 days. But I wasn't thinking about a force for the attack itself.
Then for what?
For the work afterward.
Neverland gave her a small smile, his eyes glinting unpleasantly.
For the looting.
For the looting? Allison asked pointedly. Or for protecting us from any friends Harper might have on the way?
You mean his friends in Braxton Universe's security? Neverland snorted. Actually, I rather hope they do show up. The more of them our Valagan friends take care of here, the fewer I'll have to deal with later when I take over the company. The Valaga have finished their examination of Harper's body, by the way.
Allison forced herself not to look away from him. Any surprises? She asked.
Not really, Neverland said. The death apparently kills humans as efficiently as it does everyone else.
An interesting weapon, Allison said.
Which I hope never gets a foothold in the Orion arm,
Neverland said, his voice going odd.
That's one of the reasons I was hoping your father could get a force out here, in fact.
Allison frowned at him. Are you asking my father to help you kill the Valaga?
Perhaps the Valaga,
Neverland said, shrugging slightly.
Or perhaps others. I presume you noticed Colonel Frost's confrontation with the Lord Highest just before you left the bridge. He nearly came to blows with him.
I'm not sure I'd call it coming to blows exactly, Allison hedged. I've seen you and Frost lock horns as solidly as they were doing.
Exactly my point,
Neverland said.
The Colonel has been growing more and more erratic lately. That's not a good thing for a delicate alliance like ours.
So you're thinking it might be a good time to clean house? Allison suggested.
Something like that.
Neverland paused, considering.
Perhaps both the house and the barn.
Allison stared at him. Are you suggesting getting rid of Frost and the Brumgas?
You said your father wanted a fair cut,
Neverland pointed out.
This would certainly leave a larger share for him.
It would indeed, Allison said, forcing her voice to remain calm. Neverland was even more cold-blooded than she'd thought. How would you explain the loss of his troops to the Patrichikuk?
This is war,
Neverland reminded her.
People die all the time in wars.
True, Allison said. Well, it certainly wouldn't cost anything to ask Dad what he thought about all this. How long until the interworld transmitter's up and running again?
Another hour at the most,
Neverland said.
We've now removed all the bullets Frost fired into it.
He grimaced.
As I said, he's getting more and more erratic.
I wish you luck trying to take his guns away from him, Allison said dryly. Fine. As soon as the transmitter is working again. Beside her bed, the intercom gave a ping.
Mr. Neverland,
the Advocatus Diabolis captain's voice came.
Bridge to Mr. Neverland.
Allison reached over and keyed the switch.
Yes, Captain,
Neverland called.
We've got 5 ships coming off Echo directly ahead,
the captain said.
Range,
Neverland demanded, scrambling to his feet.
About 5,000 miles, the captain said. Correction, there are now 20 ships. No, 50. 120. Oh my, it's over 300, and they're still coming.
Neverland looked at Allison, his eyes dark.
The Kada and Shantine,
he said.
They're here.